Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Tabc Talks for this month. And I saw a bunch of comments from folks that couldn't hear. We weren't actually saying anything. We were just playing those slides so that you could read them. But now we're actually going to start on the presentation itself. Somebody type a message to let me know if you can hear now. Okay, great. I'm Amy Cardona, co-director of Strategic Initiatives and Performance Improvement at Tabc. And today I'll be talking about upcoming changes to the license and permit structure. And this is one of three major changes that will occur on September 1st. This presentation is the second in a series of several Tabc talks that relate to the big licensing and technology transition effective on September 1st. And so this series is called Licensing Technology Transition. It's just that this is the second topic of several that we'll be presenting about in the starting last month and then in the coming months as well. Last month, Marianne Morlock kicked off this series by presenting about the temporary process Tabc will use for originals and renewals between now and the launch of Ames in September. Ames being the alcohol industry management system, the new system we'll be using. And this month, I'll talk about legislative changes that will alter the license and permit structure. And we'll be doing like I said, presentations related to this transition starting last month and through September. So I'll start by providing some background and giving you a high-level summary of what we'll be talking about during today's presentation. So September 1st marks a major transition in multiple areas of Tabc and the alcoholic beverage industry. So we have three major events. The first is the new license and permit structure. And this new structure is a result of beer and ale consolidation into a single malt beverage category. We also have a number of subordinate permits that will be eliminated and those privileges rolled into the primary licenses. And all of these changes are a result of the sunset process from the 2019 legislative session. And this Tabc Talks is focused on this particular aspect of the transition. The second event is new software, new system. So Tabc will be launching the alcohol industry management system, also known as Ames. It's a new online system that businesses will be able to use to apply for licenses and conduct other sorts of business other transactions with Tabc, such as getting approval for temporary events. And we'll be talking a bit about those kinds of events later in the presentation. Additionally, more details on Ames and how license holders and applicants will be introduced to it and how they'll onboard into the system. Those will be provided at the Tabc Talks in June. The third major event is fees. So right now we have sort of a patchwork of surcharges in rule and then fees in statute for different licenses and permits. As of September 1st, those statutory fees will go away and we will have in our rules a single fee for each type of license or permit. And just for a note for you all, I know everyone's interested in fees, so just to let you know, the new fees to be recommended to the commission to the Tabc Commission will be discussed at a stakeholder meeting on June 2nd. And you can expect some communication about that beforehand so that you can review the proposed rule before that stakeholder meeting. In today's presentation, I'll cover the types of structural changes that will occur. I'll talk at a high level about how these changes will translate into the new Ames system. But of course, I will leave details on that to our CIO, Retta Mosley, who will be presenting about Ames onboarding in June. And then of course, we'll have the opportunity, you'll have the opportunity for Q&A. And just so you know, starting last month, when we had that the Tabc Talks about the temporary process we're using for applications and such, we're gonna be taking all of the questions from today, and we started this last month, taking those questions, answering them, and then publishing those answers on our website and also through sending an industry notice as well. And so I'm not sure, so all the questions asked last month, and there were about 50, we have prepared answers for those, and those should be published today, I believe, if they haven't been already. So questions that we received this month, I will answer the ones that I can, but if I can't answer them, we will certainly write all of them. We'll develop answers to all of those and then publish those hopefully before the next TABC talks in June. Okay, so let's talk about the 30,000-foot view of these structural changes. So these changes we're talking about today are a result of the TABC Sunset Bill that was passed in 2019, HB 1545. There are many different components of this bill, and we've been working on implementation since, it's been almost 2 years since we started that. So it's a very complex bill. There's a lot of different provisions related to protests, to product registration, to the license structure, fees, a lot of different things. And so we've implemented a number of those changes already. In this last batch of changes relate to changes to the licensing structure and the mandate that TABC adopt new fees and rule. Those requirements will be in effect on September 1st. And that will be the last batch of changes from the Sunset Bill. The revamp of the license and permit structure occurs in 2 stages, and it's actually already partially complete. So on September 1st of 2019, 14 permits were eliminated. And I think the biggest impact there were the 4 agents permits that we used to have. And we had thousands of folks that had those permits, and those were eliminated along with a number of other permits that were not used at all or rarely used, where folks were able to actually transition to a different type of permit. So currently we have 61 licenses and permits. The second stage of this streamlining of the license structure is more significant. Most license holders will see some sort of impact in terms of the permits that they will hold going forward, but that will be to varying degrees. So some permit holders will be more affected than others. And overall, we will go down to 37 permits overall, and that includes primary permits, subordinate permits, and the only temporary permit that we'll have left. So I'll be going through all of these types of changes and going through some examples as we move forward in the presentation. I do want to mention that we have a document on our website now that has information about every permit type we have and how the changes will impact each individual permit. So I'll talk more later in the presentation about how you can actually access that document. We did send it out through an industry notice, I believe about a month ago, if not more, and it's on our website currently. So we have a page that's TABC 2021 changes, and you can find links to this document there, and it's called September 1st, 2021 License Consolidation Explained. And also I have a number of graphics in this presentation that I pulled directly from that document. And so when you actually go to look at that document, it'll look familiar. So let's dive into the changes themselves. Okay, so the first category of license structure changes are those resulting from beer and ale consolidation into a single malt beverage category. So starting on September 1st, beer and ale as separate types of alcoholic beverages, that distinction will be erased from the code. And so any place where the code has ale or beer, that will become malt beverage everywhere. That's part of the reason why the Sunset Bill was so long, because all those references had to be updated. But one of the major impacts of beer and ale consolidation is that it will eliminate the need to have a separate beer license and an ale permit to cover all malt beverages. So essentially, this will result in a simplification of the license structure for industry members who deal with malt beverages for the most part. So we have 3 different instances where we have a beer license and an ale permit that are consolidating under a new malt beverage license. So this first example you'll see on this slide is the manufacturer's license and the brewer's permit that we have under current law, and how those will be merged into the brewer's license. So if you currently hold both of these, you will only need to have the brewer's license going forward. If you only have a brewer's permit or you only have a manufacturer's license, you will have a brewer's license going forward. That will also give you the authority to manufacture all sorts of malt beverages. Let's see. I also want to mention that the graphic on this slide, I did pull that from that document that I was talking about. So it does list all of the authorities, the subordinates and things that will be consolidated into the brewer's license. I'm not going to talk about that on this slide, but that will be covered later on in the presentation. So the same concept applies to the self-distribution license that we have that covers beer, and also the self-distribution permit we have that covers ale. So going forward, the license and permit will be merged and we'll have a single brewer's self-distribution license. And we have a new moniker for that, the SD license, and that will cover self-distribution of all malt beverages. So the last example of this, sort of the consolidation of beer licenses and ale permits relates to the non-residence license and permit that we currently have. So the non-resident manufacturer's license and the non-resident brewer's permit will be consolidated into the non-resident brewer's license. So this means that if you currently hold a non-resident, so I just want to kind of give you an example of how this will play out and kind of the streamlining that you'll see happen as a result of this. So if you currently have a non-resident seller's permit and you also have a non-resident brewer's subordinate, the U, and let's say that you have a non-resident manufacturer's license as well, because what you do is you import malt beverages into the state, but you don't deal with wine or distilled spirits. So going forward, you're only going to need to have a non-resident brewer's license. Of course, if you also import wine and distilled, you'll have to have the non-resident sellers and the non-resident brewer's license. But in that case, if you're just dealing with malt beverages, that'll take your permit, the number of permits you need from 3 down to 1, just because of this change. So I mentioned already that non-resident licenses and permits are changing, but I want to explain how that will also translate into the new Ames online system and how it will impact your license and permit renewal. So this chart on the slide, it essentially shows the logic that we used, that we're using in migrating data about permits and licenses that we have now into the new Ames system. So that migration is ongoing. And essentially some rules had to be applied for how we're going to transition to the new structure into the new system based on the permits and licenses that folks have now. So right now, if you just have a non-resident sellers, you will have a non-resident sellers going forward. If you have a non-resident sellers with that non-resident brewer's subordinate, in Ames, you'll see a non-resident sellers and a non-resident brewer's license. If you have a non-resident manufacturer's license, you'll have a non-resident brewers in Ames. However, like I was in that example I was giving, if you have a non-resident sellers and that non-resident brewers just because you're importing ale into the state, you can drop that non-resident sellers when you go to renew in Ames. So, but we're keeping them because there was no clear way for us to decipher which non-resident sellers were only importing ale. So to be on the safe side, we're going to transition both of those. So that's what you'll see when you go to onboard into Ames, if those are the permits that you hold. Okay, so we will also have some permits and licenses that will have some changes to their authorities. Even though the permits themselves are not consolidating with anything else and they're not changing names or anything. So the first change is really with the distribution tier. The distributor's license going forward, will have the authority to distribute all malt beverages. So conversely, the authority to distribute ale, that the wholesaler's permit and the general class B wholesaler's permit, the W and the X, the ale authority that they have now will be merged into the distributor's license. So the wholesaler's permit will just be wine and distilled spirits, and then the X will be just wine. So we did check to look at our current wholesale permit holders that report sales of ale, and they all have a distributor's license, so this transition should be seamless. In addition, package stores and wine-only package stores will gain authority to sell all malt beverages under their P and Q permits. So this means that So a lot of package stores and wine-only package stores also have a separate beer off-premise license, the BF. That will no longer be needed after September 1st. So as we migrate data from the legacy systems into Ames, we are not carrying over those BF licenses to Ames. At least that's the rule that we talked about, and data migration can get messy, but that's the goal, is that you're not going to see, if you're a package store, you're not going to see the BF in the new system when you actually go to onboard, and you're not going to have to renew that the next time that you renew. However, for example, if your permit expires in July of this year, you're going to have to renew the BF at that time. But then when you renew 2 years later, that's when you won't have to renew your BF again. And that aligns with that, that transition process that we talked about last month. Okay, so the most straightforward change related to beer and ale consolidation as it relates to the actual permit structure is just some name changes. So like I said, every place that beer and ale appear in the code, that's all changing to malt beverage. And so that's gonna change the names of some of our permits as well. So I think there are 3 examples. The one I have on the slide is for the beer, the wine and beer retailers permit, the BG. That's going to change to the wine and malt beverage retailers permit. And then you'll have a similar change with the wine and beer retailers off-premise permit, or the BQ. And I believe that will also affect one of our private club permits too. However, keep in mind that there's no actual changes to the authorizations there, because like a BG and a BQ can already sell all malt beverages, so there was no need to change anything in that regard. Okay, so this next section covers the consolidation of subordinates. So we're moving from beer and ale consolidation to consolidation of subordinates. And I have 3 slides that cover this particular type of change. Essentially what the Sunset Bill does is it merges authorities that you currently have to obtain by getting a subordinate into your primary permit. And these changes do not eliminate all of the subordinates we have, but it does eliminate a good number of them. So essentially what's happening though is that the authorization in the subordinate permit, it's really staying the same. It's just that that language is being lifted from one part of the code and put into the chapter that authorizes that primary permit. It's just that it's substantively the same, but there's not really an extra hoop of getting that separate permit. So on this slide, I've got 4 examples here. So that first, the importer's license and the importer's carrier's license, those licenses allow for the importation and transport, excuse me, of beer currently. Those are being eliminated, and the authority to import and transport malt beverages will be included under the brewer's license and the distributor's license. So next, the beverage cartage permit is being eliminated as well. So that means that mixed beverages and private clubs will be able to transport product without having this separate permit. Okay, so local cartage is a little bit more complex. So for package stores and wine-only package stores, the Sunset Bill did eliminate this permit as a subordinate. So they will be able to transport product without having the local cartage subordinate. For BGs, so there was separate legislation in 2019, SB 1232, that allowed BGs to deliver, I think, wine and ale with food if they had a local cartage subordinate. So that language is still there, and so we sort of have a conflict between the intent of the legislature to eliminate this as a subordinate, but we still have language that specifies that a BG needs to have a local cartage in order to do that particular activity. So what we're going to do is we plan to make it easy. So if a BG needs to have this permit in order to deliver product, we're not going to charge for it. So it'll be available to you in Ames, but we're trying to treat permit holders the same, according with the legislative intent to eliminate this as a subordinate, but also still comply with the letter of the statute by keeping the permit around. So maybe that'll be addressed in future legislative sessions, but it doesn't look like it's going to get changed this time around. Next, the private carrier permit, the O permit, is going away. So all of the licenses and permits listed under this section, they're going to have the ability to transport product without having the private carrier. So that impacts folks like brewers, distillers, wholesalers, et cetera. The L and the K permits are the public or the private storage permit and the public storage permit. Those are going away, and the authority to store alcoholic beverages will just be rolled into the permits listed there as well. I'm going to start answering questions. I saw a question. I'm going to start answering those when I finish with the presentation, but I did see it. I just wanted to let you know. So this last slide about consolidation of subordinates, this sort of is the last handful of permits that are affected by this. The minibar permit, which is currently can be a subordinate for hotels, that authority will be merged into the mixed beverage. So for hotels that have a mixed beverage, they can have minibars without having to have that minibar permit. Additionally, package stores and wine-only package stores can do product tastings without having the package store tasting permit. The winery storage permit, which I believe allows for storage of wine in dry areas, I think, that is also being eliminated. So essentially these requirements, so the requirements governing the tastings and the mini bars and all that, they're going to still be in place. It's just that a permit will not be required to do that. Okay. So the next category of changes are temporary events. So let's talk about those. Using this, so I'm using temporary events as a broad term. So right now we have temporary permits, we have catering permits, winery festival permits, et cetera. But when I talk about temporary events, I'm really talking about all of those. Because on September 1st, the catering and winery festivals, those will no longer be in the code. It'll just be events at a temporary location, and we will call them temporary events on our forms and on our website and everything. So essentially what you need to know is that these are changing from a structural standpoint, and we'll have new rules going forward that account for the structural changes. And those were adopted actually by the Commission in November of 2020, and they'll be effective on September 1st. And we'll have a TABC talks in July that will actually go over more of the details there. And I'm going to talk about temporary events in two different categories. So one category is for 2-year permit holders. So if you already hold a primary permit, and then the other category is nonprofits. And nonprofits is defined under the new statute, and it basically includes any organization that's not a 2-year permit holder that can hold one of these temporary events now. And it's pretty broad. It does include organizations that you typically think of as a nonprofit, but also political action committees and candidates. Generally, the authorizations and what you can and can't do aren't really changing much. It's more so changes to the actual permit structure, the permits you need or don't need, the process and the forms you'll use. So also expect an updated advisory on temporary events. We have one out there now that will be updated. It is being updated to conform with the new statute and rules. And that updated advisory will roll out concurrent with when these changes are effective. So now I'll get a bit more into detail about the two different categories I mentioned. 2-year permit holders. Okay. So in a nutshell, on-premise retailers and wineries will be able to hold events at a temporary location without having additional permits or paying for additional permits to TABC. This does not mean that you won't have to get pre-approval from TABC for certain events. And actually, this is another example of how subordinates are rolling into primaries, but temporary events is kind of a special category, so I put all of this together. So the caterers permit and the winery festival permit are being eliminated for the mixed beverage and for wineries. And then all the other types of temporary permits that you can get as a 2-year permit holder, those are being eliminated as well. And so you're going to see temporary event authority for mixed beverage, wine and malt beverage retailers, wineries, private clubs, etc. And then let's see. You'll also still have to get Tabc approval for certain events, and you'll be able to submit file and use notifications for some events, like small private events, similar to the process that we have now for mixed beverage and wineries. But the difference is that all the on-premise retailer permittees that have the authority to hold temporary events, they'll be included in that same process. So we'll have 2 different forms for you. One will be a temporary event approval form, and one will be a file and use notification for small private events. And the criteria for when you can use a file and use is I think, the same as what we have in rule right now for catering and winery festival events. And again, I'm not going to get into too much detail here just because we have other material to cover and because we are going to cover temporary events in July. Also remember, there will be no additional fees since this authority is part of your primary permit. Okay, so let's talk about nonprofits. So I pulled this graphic from that document I was talking about, and essentially it just shows you that we have 5 different temporary permits that a nonprofit can access right now, and how those are all being merged into the new Consolidated Nonprofit Entity Temporary Event Permit, the NT. That's the name of it in statute. It's kind of a long name. Essentially, these organizations will still require a permit to hold a temporary event, but all of the different authorities under the different permit types are also consolidated into this new NT permit. So everything from auctions to every other type of event they can have now. There will also be a separate NT permit application form. So in total, for temporary events, we'll have 3 forms: the temporary event approval, the file and use notification, and then this permit application form too. And this will continue to be a permit, and it will be the only temporary permit that we have left when these changes take effect. Okay, so we do have just a few more slides on the changes, the types of changes themselves. This last one, it's really just, we have a couple of different examples where we have multiple permits that are merging into a new consolidated one. This last category of changes is, it doesn't really affect the authorizations, but it's more just kind of a streamlining of the permits. So with late hours, right now, we have 3 different licenses depending on what type of primary you have. And as of September 1st, you'll have if you have one of these now, you'll have a late hour certificate that works for all 3 of those. And substantively, the authorizations don't change, it's just the streamlining of the permits. Okay. And the same goes for our transportation permits. So we have 4 different permits right now that are really just, I mean, the authorizations and stuff are different, but they're named just depending on what mode of transportation we're talking about. In the future, we'll just have 1 passenger transportation permit. And again, specific authorizations are not changing. It's really just that the language from all 4 of those chapters was rolled into the single passenger transportation permit. So the requirements aren't changing, but the permit is being streamlined in that sense. Okay, so I mentioned this document a few times, more than a few times, I think, in this presentation. If you want to see how your specific permit or license type is being affected by these changes, and I didn't cover it in this presentation, you can go to this document. It's called September 1st, 2021 License Consolidation Explained, and that's a screenshot of the first page there. And to find it, so you can actually, I believe that we put this presentation in board docs and possibly on our website as well. So you could click there, but if you want to go and see it now, you can go to the top left corner of our homepage. There's a services menu, and it has TBC 2021 changes under that. And then you can go to license changes under that. And that's where you'll find this document. You can download it and look at it. It has quite a bit of detail about how all the changes are impacting permit holders. Okay, so before I wrap up, I want to quickly touch on how this new structure is translating into Ames, because I want to kind of tie these two things together. And again, I'm not going to go on too far into detail just because that's not my expertise, but also because our CIO, Retta Mosley, will cover that in June at TABC Talks when she talks about onboarding into Ames and what you can expect with that. So basically, we built the Ames system for the new structure and the new fees. So the current structure and fees are staying in our legacy systems, and going forward, it's just going to reflect the new structure. And that is part of the reason that we have the transition process that we have. So if you expire before September 1st, your renewal will be processed in current systems using current structure and fees. And the reason for that is we can't update our old systems to reflect the new structure. And Ames will only have the new structure. So we had to really create an objective standard for when you renew, will that be in the sort of current structure and fees or new? So also we are migrating data for permit holders into the new system. And what you see when you onboard into Ames should be your new permit structure. So if you have subordinates that are not needed going forward, you shouldn't be seeing those in Ames. Because as far as Ames is concerned, those don't exist. Okay. And again, stay tuned in June for TBC Talks about Ames onboarding. Okay, now it's Q&A time, and I already have some here. So let me read the questions, and then I'll answer the ones that I can. And like I said before, we're going to download all of these questions and then answer them and publish those answers for everybody to take advantage of, hopefully within about a month's time. So the first question is, we currently hold a Q and BF permits that expire in July. If we choose not to renew the BF permit now and stop selling beer, can that BF inventory be sold after September 1st under the Q without any transfer requirements or other issues related? I do not know the answer to that. I can't give you I'm not confident about the answer to that, so we will be sure to include that in our FAQ. Yeah. Okay, for BS and U permits that will be consolidated into the BN permit, do we need to get a bond writer? That's another great question that I don't have the answer to. If we have, so this is a good question as well. If we have any of these licenses that are being eliminated, is there anything we need to do, or will they essentially disappear? Yes, they will. Like I mentioned, Ames is being built for the new structure. The only thing that I could see is if you're a non-resident seller that has the non-resident brewers and you're only selling ale, then you may need to drop your non-resident sellers when you go to renew, because we're carrying forward all of those. But for the most part, you're not going to see obsolete permits. You're not going to see obsolete permits in Ames. Let's see. When will local jurisdictions get the updated fee schedule? So we are going to, like I said, we're going to have a stakeholder meeting about fees on June 2nd, and we're going to be distributing some information, a draft rule, I believe next week. Am I correct about that? Okay. The updated fee schedule. So actually, so right now what the sunset bill will require is that we post the current statutory fees on our website so that local governments know how much they can charge. There is a bill going through the legislative process right now, and I don't know if it will pass or not, so I can't really comment on the outcome of that. But under current law, we will be posting the statutory fees in effect on August 31st. And so in that sense, things won't change for local governments. So, but we have to post that by September 1st. Okay, start. So if that bill I mentioned about the local fees, if it goes through as we think it might, assuming it does pass, we don't believe that local governments will experience there won't be a change really in the fees that they can charge. And I think the bill is really just meant to kind of clarify some inconsistencies because our permit structure is changing and there's some changing of names and things like that. Okay, starting September 1st, we got a question about temporary events. Will the temporary notice filings be continued? I think you might be talking about the file and use. Non-NT permit. Be continued to be filed via email to the respective regions or submitted through Ames directly. We will prefer that you use Ames. However, we will have the forms available on our website. The new forms will be available on August 1st for any events that occur September 1st or after. So actually we will be accepting, and we'll get into this later because we did come up with a transition process for temporary events, but we will have those forms available that you can download, and there will be email addresses you can email them to that region. But Ames will be set up to process those, or so that you can submit those online and that you don't actually have to email it. If you are a distributor, will you have to keep the old license structure as well as the new over the next few years? No. I'm not sure I understand the question. So, I mean, if you're a, let's see. I may come back to that, but I need some clarification about what you mean by that. Okay, if my mixed beverage license expires September 3rd, will it be okay for me to wait until September 1st to apply for renewal? I need help. It's the one about my mixed beverage expires September 3rd.
Actually, you can't apply.
Yeah, you actually cannot apply before September 1st. So the goal is for any renewals occurring September 1st or after, those will occur in Ames. And we have a temporary rule in place that Marianne covered last month about how that will work. And we're not charging late fees. Correct. No late fees in September as well. Anything else I should add to that? Okay. And we do have a number of questions related to this topic in the FAQ that we're about to publish on our website. So I keep an eye out for that as well. City of Plano, we have to update our systems to transition to the new permits and fee structures. When will local jurisdictions get the new permits and fee structures? So like I mentioned, we already have a document on our website that has what the new structure will be. I believe there's a summary document there. Yeah. So the information is out there about what the new structure will look like overall and what the new names will be. And we actually don't have a ton of permits that are changing names. We do have some consolidations, like I mentioned, but a lot of it is just that permits are being straight up eliminated. And like I said about fees, the fees that we have enrolled, that's going to be discussed on June 2nd. But we believe under current law in the Sunset Bill and also under possible changes the legislature might make, we don't believe there's going to be significant changes to the what you can charge now, or I guess compared to what you can charge now. So there's a question about data migration. All I can tell you about that may be a better question for our CIO next month. But essentially what I was talking about with data migration was just that essentially we had to put some sort of parameters in place to translate the current permit and license information to translate that into Ames, because we wanted to make sure that we were translating it based on the new structure, so that we weren't carrying over old permits that are going to be obsolete on September 1st. We didn't want to import all of that information into Ames when it wasn't needed. That's essentially what I was talking about. But more specifics in terms of what attributes are being imported and all of that, I think that's a better question for Retta next month, but we will also include it in the FAQ, as we will include all of these questions. Are we able to get a copy of the presentation? I think this, I think we post these to board docs or on the website. Yeah. Well, I know that the actual presentation, the video will be there. From last month, the TABC Talks is actually on our website, so this one will be as well. The actual presentation, I know we distribute that. I'm just not sure if it's on our website or board docs, because I know we've done board docs in the past, I think. Let's see. How does Ames work with local jurisdictions? Will the applicant still need to download the pre-qual packet and get it signed? Yes.
Download it from Ames.
Yes, the applicant will download it from Ames and then take it to get those certifications.
And more specifics are in the FAQ.
Oh, and more specifics about how that will work are in the FAQ we're about to publish, because I think that was covered last month. Will the distributor have to maintain the old? Oh, this is a clarification from the previous question.
What about consultants working for permittees? Answer in the FAQ.
So, I mean, I think the bottom line is that Ames is being set up for the new permit structure. I'm not sure about the license number. I'm not sure how that's translating. I'm sure there's logic behind that. But that would be a good IT question for next month. And of course, like, we'll answer it in the FAQ as well. But when you onboard into Ames, you're going to see your up-to-date permit structure. So you're not going to see anything that's under, anything that's obsolete. That's not going to be in there.
It should be the same license number, with the exception of the brewers and the non-residents.
Oh, so for most license holders, you're going to have the same license number. I got some more information. I phoned a friend. You'll have the same license number you have now. But for some of those that are merging, like the brewer's license and the brewer's permit and the manufacturer's license into the brewer's license. Did you say it was the older one?
Then the non-resident manufacturer, non-resident.
I think we're taking one of those existing permit numbers and translating that to Ames, but I'm not sure which one. It might be the older one. So whichever permit you apply for first. But again, we'll get confirmation and get you an answer. How are we doing on time? Let's see. Okay, we're doing okay. For the temporary application that will be in Ames, will there still be a hard copy county and city letter of approval? I do know that, I'm not sure exactly how that's going to look in Ames, to be honest, but I do know that getting approval from local governments is still something that's going to be required. I just don't know exactly how that's going to look. Okay.
Some of these questions were asked last time in the FAQ.
Okay. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up, and we will address these questions in the FAQ, but I will say that a lot of these questions were brought up last month, and we do have answers to those in the FAQ that we're publishing today. So I would be on the lookout for that, because we'll send an industry notice and then it will be on our website too. Let's see. And of course, if you think of any other questions later on, please send those to the stakeholder at tabc.texas.gov, that email that's on the screen. And we will include those in the FAQ we publish next month. And so, like I said, next month you can expect more information about Ames. And I think that wraps us up. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it.